Bonjour, je voudrais vous souhaiter la bienvenue à Montréal et au nom du CBBC et du secrétariat sur la Convention de biodiversité, je vous souhaite la bienvenue à cet événement qui est important. You don't have to be worried. The whole presentation is going to be in English, but I thought that I had to start in French. If you want it in French, you can ask, but I don't think most people will understand. I want to thank everybody for coming here. It's very impressive. From what I understand, at last count, there was 26 countries represented here, so it's fantastic. So I'm very, very glad to see that business is getting involved. As with many environmental files, it's clear that the government has a role to play. ONGs have an important role to play, but business is at the core of where we can see change. This is where we operate. This is where we are in our environment, we're in society, and our role is to drive this agenda forward. I'm hoping that we're able today to create a collaborative environment where we can share ideas and drive this agenda forward. Contrary to other files like water, like climate change, biodiversity doesn't have as much traction today, and it's very sad because in our communities, this is where we leave the most visible footprint. You know, climate change, yes, you will have indirect observations. Water, you might or might not see it, but really biodiversity is where we touch societies, where we touch our neighbors. So it's important that business recognizes that we have a role and we can really leave a visible footprint of our action and hopefully a positive footprint. We have to shy away from the idea of where this is a punitive environment where we have to just protect a few species, and we have to make it part of our daily business and recognize that no matter what type of business we have, we touch biodiversity directly or indirectly. What I would like to see in time is a dramatic change on how we see this. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we said, let's put seat belts in cars and let's have people wear their seat belts. They weren't wearing them. Now everybody does. It became part of driving the car. Nobody had iPhones 20 years ago. Now everybody's using them. We have to make this part of business. And I think that in the next day and a half, we'll have a series of examples that will show us how it can be done, and we can bring that to our respective countries afterwards. I know that it's not always evident to sell this down to our employees, if you want to look at it as being down, or look up to upper management. It has to be communicated through the whole organization. I think there's a great sense of pride that can be given to our partners by the actions that we do, the visible actions we do on biodiversity. But as with climate change and many other issues, you recognize that it's a long-term process. You don't see results today of the actions we will do to protect our ecosystems and our environment, but we still have to do it. Also, we have to try to recognize that our role is not to over-engineer solutions everywhere. Sometimes it's something simple. You just allow nature to take over and do whatever it would have done, and we just try to help things along or remove barriers. So I think there's a lot of simple solutions that can be implemented. I think we're going to hear a lot of them this week, and I hope that you enjoy this conference as much as I'm sure I will. So right now, I will introduce our first speaker. Let me see here. I have the list of the bios. Mr. John, pardon? Okay, go ahead. Mr. Jong Park, Deputy Director, Natural Resource Division, Ministry of the Environment, Government of the Republic of Korea, who was the host of CBD COP 12. Mr. Jung Young Park was born in Seoul with advanced education at Seoul National University and grad school with a major in biological science. He worked in Macrogen Biological Science Research Center for 4 years and Yuhan Corporate Pharmaceutical Company Research Center for 1 year. He is currently working with MOE, responsible for biodiversity, R&D, and supporting and implementation of CPD decision, including managing research in biodiversity. Nagoya Protocol, biological resources related manpower training policy, and managing of biological resources conservation facilities. Mr. Park.
Thank you for your introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this honorable meeting. On behalf of the Minister of Environment, of the Republic of Korea, I would like to deliver my sincere appreciation to Mr. Braulio de Souza Diaz, the Executive Secretary of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, and Mr. Robert McLean and Environment Canada, and Mr. Roger Bernard and Government of the Province of Quebec, Mr. Rick Robitaille, the Chairman of the Canadian Business and Biodiversity Council, and the Indian government, and all representatives and staffs here. I'm sorry. My name is Jeongjun Park, and I'm Deputy Director of Ministry of Environment, Republic of Korea. It is my great honor to join this meeting, and it is also great honor to make opening remarks on behalf of my ministry at this very honorable day. In these opening remarks, I would like to mention 2 points. One is the experience of Korea on launching of Korean Business and Biodiversity Initiative. The other is an introduction of a main theme and plan about the next conference of the parties that will be held in Pyeongchang in October next year. Firstly, I am very happy to introduce launching of a Korean Business and Biodiversity Initiative held last week. Korea successfully finished the signing ceremony of Korean Business and Biodiversity Declaration. On September 26th, the Korean Ministry of Environment hosted the signing ceremony, which is a kick-off for a national initiative in Korea. The Vice Minister of the Korean Ministry of Environment and a representative of Gay.net delivered their congratulatory message in the ceremony. Thankfully, Mr. Braulio de Souza Diaz, Executive Secretary of SCBD, delivered his congratulatory remarks via video. The ceremony was successfully finished with about 70 participants, including 27 CEOs and executives of various companies and organizations. The Japanese Business and Biodiversity Partnership and the CBD Secretariat and KBCSD, abbreviation of Korea Business Council for Sustainable Development, regional partner of WBCSD, and Korea Biotechnology Industry Organizations, and Secretariat of Green Companies. Green Companies is designated by MOE Korea. Also supported this event. And KBCSD has 43 member companies, including major big companies such as Samsung, LG, SK, POSCO, GS Caltex, etc. And KBIO has over 300 member companies, including major pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. And green companies is designated by MOE Korea in order to reduce emissions of carbon dioxide and facilitate recycling of natural resources. The launching of Korean initiative was built on several previous workshops and policy gatherings held in Korea before and after COP11. The Korean initiative will be undertaking a number of activities to help raise awareness of this issue amongst the Korean business community, and will be planning several activities in cooperation with partners for COP12 in Pyeongchang. The Korean initiative will raise awareness of business community through making business manuals and education programs and best practice awarding. And Ministry of Environment and KBCS, they are working on making a guideline for business and biodiversity and sustainable use for now. And secondly, the initiative will extend joint activities to various fields such as habitat conservation and restoration and proliferation of endangered species in Korea and nationwide publicity. And we are planning the second signing ceremony of KBBI in the first half of next year. And the Korean initiative will also expand international cooperation, such as active participation in international organizations such as CBD and UNEP, etc. And networking with global initiatives like you, and introduction of Korean best practice to the world. And also we are planning holding of the fourth meeting of global partnership in cooperation with SCBD in COP12. Secondly, I would like to introduce main themes and plans of COP12. First of all, the Republic of Korea is so proud to be next host of CBD COP. And the Republic of Korea returns thanks to the effort of the government of India and SCBD. Next year, the Republic of Korea will deliver 3 messages in COP12. First, biodiversity and sustainable development. Second, biodiversity and peace. And third, biodiversity and job creation. We need to develop concrete methods to achieve sustainable development as well as biodiversity conservation. And the Korean government is striving to keep pace with global trends such as harmonization of conservation and development. Before the COP12, the Korean government will go extra miles and suggest concrete sustainable development methods via achievement of environmental welfare. Next, the Korean government will suggest peace based on biodiversity. As you know, Korea is a divided country. This year, Korean government is establishing the demilitarized zone Eco-Peace Park near Pyeongchang, which is expected to facilitate peace building through conservation of biodiversity in the DMZ region. Expanding joint efforts of conservation in the region between South and North Korea, the Korean government will present a new model on peace through biodiversity. Finally, the Korean government would like to suggest job creation through biodiversity, industrial extension, and technology innovation based on biological resources will lead to more practical and effective biodiversity conservation and sustainable use of components of biodiversity. This picture shows Alpanesia Resort in Pyeongchang, the venue for next COP. Pyeongchang is also the location for the 2018 Winter Olympic Games. I hope we meet together in that beautiful conference venue next year. I assure you that the Republic of Korea will spare no time and efforts to hold one of the most successful COP in the CBDG history by providing cutting-edge IT technologies and paperless conferences and comfortable accommodations. I'm looking forward to seeing you all in Pyeongchang next year. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is going to be Braulio de Souza Diaz. First, I want to especially thank the Secretariat for the Convention of Biological Diversity for helping us organize this important event. I'm so glad to see so many people here. I encourage you while you're here, if you have a chance, to visit the area, visit Montreal, visit the surroundings. This is a perfect time of year to visit. The leaves are turning, it's magnificent. So take advantage of this beautiful weather to visit the area. We're very proud to have in Canada, in the province of Quebec and in Montreal, the Secretariat. And I'm very glad that the Secretary could be here with us today. So thank you very much. Give a little bit of his bio here. Mr. Braulio de Souza Diaz, who is the Executive Secretary of the CBD Secretariat in Montreal. Prior to being named head of the CBD Secretariat in 2011, Dr. Diaz had over 3 decades of experience in biodiversity science and policy and its implementation at national and international levels. He has occupied leading positions in the Brazilian federal government, including Secretary of Biodiversity and Forest at the Brazilian Ministry of the Environment and Director for Biodiversity. He coordinated the National Biodiversity Program, the negotiations for the creation of Brazil's National Biodiversity Policy, and the National Biological Diversity Project. While Associate Professor of Forest Protection and Ecology at the University of Brasilia, he was involved in negotiations of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Mr. Diaz has since participated in each of the meetings of the Conference of the Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity as a member of the Brazilian delegation. He obtained a BSc in Biological Sciences from the University of Brasilia and went on to obtain his PhD in Zoology from the University of Edinburgh in 1981. He speaks English, Portuguese, Spanish, and is married with 1 son.
Good morning to all, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm delighted to welcome you to the 3rd meeting of the Global Partnership on Business and Biodiversity here in Montreal. This platform brings together a growing number of nascent national business and biodiversity initiatives that are key to engaging the business community in this area. Building upon the first 2 meetings of the Global Partnership that stimulated many ideas and best practices, I hope you will be able to make progress in helping business maximize their ability to mainstream the objectives of the convention into your business. The partnership currently has around 24 countries members, with many more countries exploring the possibility of joining. In order to maximize its effectiveness, however, it's important that major economies, business interests, and other key stakeholder groups are represented and involved. I'm especially glad to see the partner organizations who are here today, many of whom will be speaking during the course of these 2 days. It is essential for me that the global partnership, that it is not seen as a competitor to the good work of these groups, of the good work that these groups are doing. Rather, we need to see the role of the partnership as a facilitating role, promoting greater dialogue and cooperation among all groups, and thus ensuring that our collective efforts are complementary as possible. The global partnership, which stemmed from decisions taken at COP10 and COP11, is a concrete signal by the global community of its increasing understanding that business needs to play a critical role in addressing the serious environmental problems facing us, including the loss of biodiversity. While tackling the issue of sustainability is a serious challenge to all, there are great opportunities for those businesses that are able to seize the initiative and develop innovative strategies. The head of the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity Study Project, the TEEP, the former managing director of the Deutsche Bank, Pavan Sukhdev, stated that, and I quote, "The importance of business to biodiversity cannot be overstated. The private sector accounts for most of the world's production of goods. What they make and how carefully and efficiently they use the Earth's resources will determine the future of biodiversity conservation." End of quote. The same study noted that the ecosystem services resulting from natural environment processes represent tens of trillions of dollars per annum worth of benefits that are currently utilized for free. By the same token, the loss of these services due to environmental degradation is in the order of $5 to $7 trillion per year, or roughly the GDP of China. Companies and governments must either forego the services that this represents or find costly alternatives. When we consider the vast efforts that global corporations and government put into assessing the newly emerging mega-economies, we have to wonder why we are so willing to simply allow this type of economic value slip through our fingers. These numbers are so large that they defy easy comprehension, but it is possible to bring it down to a more manageable scale. An interesting and several interesting examples exist all around the world about these values of biodiversity. Just to mention one, a national park in Madagascar called Mazola, where the following economic benefits from biodiversity have been identified. For medicines, about $1.5 million US, for erosion control, about $380,000 US, for carbon storage, about $105 million, for recreation, around $5 million, and other forest products, about $4.2 million. These numbers show the potential that is available to those with the foresight to realize them. There are many examples of firms that have taken steps to realize these opportunities and offer positive examples that others can emulate. During the next 2 days, you will be hearing about many interesting and inspiring examples of corporations' actions that have made a positive impact in this area. One important initiative that has been taken, and that hopefully will find many followers in the future, involves the effort that the company Puma has been taking to find the true costs in environmental terms of its products. The environmental profit and loss studies that it has started has both shown the impact of Puma's manufacturing process and demands for materials, but also, more interestingly, how these impacts are distributed along its supply chain, with the vast majority of this impact being concentrated in the lower tier suppliers, which are more distant from the parent company. The results are striking in that they not only show the complexity of these issues, but also a way in which companies can create real opportunities from this challenge by effectively and proactively managing the supply chain. Supply chain management is one of the topics that you will have opportunity to discuss over these 2 days. It is my hope that these panel sessions on a wide variety of issues related to the CBD business engagement agenda will provide you with a great deal of food for thought, as well as case studies that will provide you with practical ideas for maximizing opportunities that will arise as sustainability becomes the new norm based on the outcomes of the RU+20 conference, The Future We Want. However, despite these initial and increasing efforts of business to mainstream the objectives of the convention, we still have a long way to go. The indicators of biodiversity loss and of other environmental problems continue to point in the wrong direction. Governments are finding it a challenge to fulfill their commitments due to lack of awareness on the part of stakeholders, which is compounded by the ongoing economic crisis and uncertainties. And the vast majority of companies have yet to understand the importance of natural capital and the risks associated with biodiversity loss to their business. Unfortunately, time is not on our side on this issue, and we must redouble our efforts if we hope to get on top of this problem. All levels of government, business, academia, and civil society must work together. The challenges are great, but I believe that creativity that we have as a species, which manifests itself in innovation and the subsequent creation of new businesses, can rise to the occasion. I am, however, encouraged that we will be able to overcome these challenges because we have witnessed an increasing willingness by governments, major stakeholders, to engage into dialogues with each other and create an enabling environment for business to act sustainably. This includes the consideration of various best practices in different fields, the examination of how legislation can be reformed such that negative incentives which encourage unsustainable practices and behavior are gradually phased out and are replaced with more eco-friendly policies and an increasingly important role of sustainable public procurement, for example. As I said, I believe that the global partnership is an embodiment of this growing realization. Governments have also recognized that tackling this issue will require significant resources that will go beyond the budgets of the environment ministries. The involvement of the private sector, including through various innovative financial mechanisms, as well as other major stakeholders, will be crucial to realizing the goal of long-term ecological sustainability. There are a number of other mechanisms, many of which will be discussed in detail later this morning. To take but one example of an interesting scheme, payment for ecosystem service can have enormous effect in terms of revenues generated, which in turn provides concrete benefits for companies, governments, and other stakeholders which use the services, the ecosystem services. The CBD Secretariat has been working hard to facilitate various types of initiatives as mandated by decisions from our Conference of the Parties. In the lead up to COP12, which will take place in the Republic of Korea next year, as already indicated, the Secretariat is planning several regional business workshops which will build up on the results generated from this meeting. We also hope to continue to expand our outreach efforts in conjunction with partners through various fora, including newsletters, web presence, national and regional conferences. We are also planning to have a significant business engagement program during the COP. And I'm very pleased that the Korean government has accepted my suggestion to have biodiversity for sustainable development as the motto for COP12. We will keep you informed of our progress in all these endeavors. It is my hope that this meeting over the course of the next couple of days will help inform some of the decisions and next steps that we must undertake together in order to address this important issue. I truly believe that through our collective efforts, we can change the world and create a more sustainable and prosperous future for ourselves in part by harnessing and benefiting from the incredible creative power of the business sector. I hope this meeting will also help us identify measures needed to move this agenda forward, which could be incorporated in a COP12 decision on a roadmap for 2020. I wish you a very successful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary Diaz. I retain from your speech the fact that this is a great forum for us to look at the concrete steps that business take to improve biodiversity. And as a representative for Wholesome, I can tell you that we love concrete steps. So the next representative is Roger Ménard, who is a representative of the government of the province of Quebec. Roger Ménard completed his undergraduate studies in economics at the University of Quebec at Trois-Rivières and the University of British Columbia. He holds a master's degree in economics from the University of Montreal. Mr. Ménard embarked on his career as an international consultant for a Montreal-based firm and worked on socio-economic studies in Guinea and Guinea-Bissau in Africa. And in 1989, he began his career with the Quebec government as an economist at the Ministère des Ressources Naturelles. He subsequently worked for the Treasury Board Secretariat, the Canadian Intergovernmental Affairs Secretariat, and the Quebec Housing Corporation. Mr. Ménard was appointed Director of Economic Analysis and Policies at the Ministère des Relations Internationales, de la Francophonie et du Commerce Extérieur in 2007. Fortunately, I speak French, so I'll be able to read those.
Mesdames et Messieurs, Mr. de Souza Diaz, Mr. Jumpa, Mr. Robitaille, Mr. McLean, and Mr. Grant. On behalf of the distinguished guests, on behalf of the Quebec government, I would like to welcome you to the third meeting of the Global Partnership for Business and Biodiversity. As you might notice, my first language is not English, it's actually French, so excuse myself in advance. Knowing the importance of the challenge that lies ahead, achieving the overarching goals of the Convention on Biological Diversity, it requires a strong involvement not only from all levels of governments, but also from all stakeholders. The delicate balance between economic growth and sustainable development is more than ever at the heart of our collective concerns. In this context, l'engagement, the involvement of the business sector appears particularly crucial since businesses often rely on natural resources or ecosystem services to provide us with a wide range of goods, services, and products. As biodiversity disappears, so does the opportunity for new technology, new medication, or even business opportunities to be developed. Therefore, I'm glad to see here in Montreal many representatives from all over the world gathering here in order to take concrete steps, and I mentioned concrete steps, on integrating biodiversity into business consideration. C'est donc un plaisir de voir dans cette salle un grand nombre de participants, de gens qui viennent de tous les coins de la planète. Your commitment will, without any doubt, result in considerable progress for the successful implementation of all of the three goals of the Convention, and I'm sure you know them by heart. I also believe that a platform like the Global Partnership for Business and Biodiversity is necessary to overcome one of the biggest challenges associated to the management of natural resources, that is the effective coordination of efforts from all stakeholders. Not only does it allow a better dialogue among businesses, but also between businesses, governments, and international organizations. I'm sure this platform has been inspirational to many other multilateral agreements. Et c'est avec beaucoup de bonheur que je vois aussi les gens dans cette salle qui vont avoir l'occasion de discuter d'un certain nombre d'enjeux et qui vont impliquer non seulement évidemment la communauté d'affaires, mais également les organisations internationales et les représentants gouvernementaux. Of course, governments, as public policy makers, also have a key role to play in the protection of natural resources and biodiversity. In this regard, I would like to stress that the Quebec government has been committed to implementing the convention for now over 15 years. It is also worth mentioning that about 9.1% of Quebec's territory, which is 3 times the size of France, by the way, including marine and coastal areas, is now conserved through an important network of protected areas. We are also well on our way of reaching our objective of having 12% of our territory covered in 2015. Last June, the Ministry of Sustainable Development, Environment, Wildlife and Parks, it's a long title, has adopted its new orientation on biological diversity, a first step in addressing the Aichi, I don't know if I pronounce it well, but the Aichi targets included in the CDB's strategic plan. At the international level, Quebec is part of the advisory committee of subnational governments to the global partnerships on local and subnational action for biodiversity. Together with other federated states and regions, we seek to promote the implementation of the convention at the subnational level by sharing notably best practices and developing common projects. It is without saying that having the honor of hosting the Secretariat of the CDB in our metropolis, Montreal, has always been highly inspirational and has fostered our will to undertake concrete actions, and I underline the word concrete, for biodiversity both at local and international levels. This Secretariat is one of the most important international organizations located in Montreal. I will mention ICAO, l'Organisation de l'Aviation Civile Internationale, which is also based in Montreal, and also the Statistical Institute of UNESCO, Institut de Statistique de l'UNESCO, 2 international organizations which are also based here in Montreal. As a host, Quebec funds the premises of Secretariat and some of its operating costs, together with the federal government. For example, in 2011, and I was personally and professionally pretty much involved in that thing, the Quebec government pledged $3.7 million for the development of the Secretariat for the period from 2011 to 2019. And we are in talks about renewing the funding for the base premises from 2014 to 2019 also. Quebec is one of the partners of the CDB Secretariat since its beginning here and intends to continue to support this prestigious organization in the future. Distinguished guests, it is an honor to have you here in Montreal. I'm convinced that you will have fruitful discussion. I won't say frank, like the former President Bush said. He said fruitful and frank, open and frank discussion. So, but I'm sure it will be very much open discussion. And I hope you have some spare times to get out of this room, enjoy the nice weather that we are actually experiencing in the last days. And we are having these days, and you will have these days to explore at least a little of the Quebec's richness from both the biodiversity and the cultural level. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias.
Merci beaucoup. And I want to thank you particularly. I assure you I had nothing to do with the word concrete in this speech. I didn't see it beforehand. The next speaker is Mr. Bob McLean. Bob McLean is currently Executive Director, Wildlife Program Policy, Environment Canada, Canadian Wildlife Service. He has more than 35 years of experience with Environment Canada, almost all of which has been with the Canadian Wildlife Service. In his current role, Bob has national policy responsibilities for the Department's Migratory Birds, Species at Risk, Habitat and Protected Areas Program. He also has national responsibility for the Department's wildlife-related environment assessment work, as well as national and international roles related to the Convention on Biological Diversity. During his career, he has assumed responsibilities ranging from administration of wildlife trade programs to compliance and enforcement activities, and has led initiatives to establish or amend several Environment Canada's wildlife-related statutes, including the Migratory Birds Convention Act, the Canada Wildlife Act, and wildlife trade legislation. He led the development of a national strategy on invasive alien species and has played a key role in initiatives such as the Ecological Gift Program and a $225 million National Area Conservation Program. In addition to his contributions within Canada, he has contributed to continental and international initiatives that include bird conservation in North America. Most recently, he was National Program Manager for Environment Canada's network of 146 protected areas, habitat stewardship programs for migratory birds, species at risk, invasive alien species, and biosphere reserves, and the development and implementation of recovery strategies under the Species at Risk Act. Mr. McLean.
Thank you very much, Luke. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow speakers in this opening plenary session. As national focal point for the Convention on Biological Diversity in Canada, it's a real pleasure to be with you this morning. On behalf of my minister, the Honourable Leona Agluka, I'd like to welcome you, those of you who've traveled from nearby, those of you who've traveled much greater distances to be at this third meeting of the Global Partnership on Business and Biodiversity. It's a wonderful city, as Michel Menard said. I hope you do get a little bit of time to visit this city at a glorious time of the year. It's exciting to see how this global partnership has evolved and grown over the last few years. As you know, Canada had the good fortune of being involved early in helping getting this partnership started. It's great to see that it has gained momentum, a momentum of its own. We've seen a similar growth with the Canadian Business and Biodiversity Council. I found it very rewarding last December to attend a national workshop, its national workshop, and I was amazed at the diversity of issues and matters that that particular meeting addressed. It looked at supply chain management through to business or biodiversity information and data and management and reporting. It looked at things like climate change in a northern environment through to urban biodiversity. When I look at the agenda that we have before us over the next 2 days, I see that similar diversity in terms of issues that business and biodiversity are tackling. I really like a couple of the publications that our National Council has produced. One called A Guide to Business to Biodiversity Conservation for Canadian Business. There's another document incorporating biodiversity considerations into the management of small and medium-sized enterprises. Both documents talk about the business case for biodiversity, and there really is a solid business case for biodiversity. I think our council and like this partnership, I think about maintaining momentum. I see the momentum internationally, I see the momentum nationally, and I think and wonder about how do we capture that and accelerate the momentum that's happening with business and biodiversity. These developments, both nationally and internationally, are, as a career conservationist, as you saw from Luke's introduction, I've been career conservation for way too many years, according to most people. But when I started, it's interesting, 1977, our department, Environment Canada, had just created regulations that allowed us to create national wildlife areas. But if we're going to be successful at biodiversity conservation, it's not about government protected areas. Those are important, but the whole landscape's important. At the end of the day, the whole landscape is critical to biodiversity conservation and ecosystem health and integrity and maintaining those ecosystem services. And so business, that working landscape business, has a fundamental role in biodiversity conservation. I think that that's my key message to you this morning, that it's not somebody else's job, such as a conservation organization or such as a protected areas manager. Business has a huge and key role. I've seen an evolution in Canada. When you're around, when you've been around as long as I have, you can actually see that change. I really started to see integration of conservation thinking into business in Canada in about the mid-1980s, and it's leaps and bounds beyond that. There are obviously lots of good examples prior to the mid-80s, but where it really seemed to gain some momentum was about the mid-1980s. And so it's great to see this momentum continuing. If you're here, you likely already understand the challenge and the opportunity that taking nature, that taking biodiversity into account presents for business. More and more companies are responding to the challenge and seeing the benefits. Sometimes, and this is because of the positive influence that corporate, social, and environmental responsibility have for the business bottom line. But often it's simply because it's the right thing to do. Biodiversity conservation, maintaining those ecosystem services is good for economic prosperity. The economic prosperity of companies, the economic prosperity of countries, and it's good for individual health and well-being. There are many good examples of leaders in Canada in business and biodiversity. Of course, I'm most familiar with a number of the Canadian examples, and I won't highlight too many. I think you might have detected that when I think about biodiversity, I think a lot about habitat. If people who know me would say I probably can't go 5 minutes without talking about habitat. So I've got 2 or 3 examples of Canadian companies that have done some fantastic things on the habitat front. One of the most interesting partnerships that we have in Canada is in the forest sector with forest companies and environmental organizations. Canadian companies are world leaders in forest certification. In 2009, Canada had 40% of the world's certified forest. And we have this innovative partnership between the forest sector and environmental organizations. I think it's going to be talked about a little bit tomorrow morning on your agenda, the Canadian Boreal Forest Agreement, where a number of forest companies and a number of environmental organizations are working together in common purpose to ensure ecosystem conservation and the viability, the economic viability, the long-term forest operations in Canada's boreal forest. That's important globally. We have about 1/3 of the world's boreal forest. Here in Quebec, Hydro-Quebec, a provincial electricity utility, is changing the way it operates to conserve biodiversity along its distribution lines. They have moved away from clear cutting along those lines in favor of selective cutting, managing wood waste on site, and keeping a number of important habitat features like standing trees and stumps that certain species need if they're going to thrive. And the last company, and with Luke here, the encouraging work being done in the extractive sector to restore sites. There's a mining town in Northern Ontario called Sudbury, a long history of mining, and there's active company participation working with the community to develop a biodiversity action plan, including commitments to long-term improvement of biodiversity in that particular ecosystem. So far, over 9 million trees and shrubs have been planted, and over 3,300 hectares of land has been regreened or restored. Wholesome has an excellent example in Milton, Ontario, which is near Toronto, about a 500 hectare property that and Luke was telling me this morning, I was aware of it before, but what the company has done with its initial restoration, and they've had 2 or 3 phases where they've refined and enhanced that habitat to improve it both ecologically and biologically. These are just a few examples. You're going to hear many more examples over the course of the next couple of days. It's a very interesting and I think exciting agenda. That doesn't happen by accident. I would like to acknowledge the role of Reg Melanson and David Sturman and others in the Secretariat for pulling this meeting together. I wish you a very successful meeting, and again, it's a pleasure to be with you.
while the Reg is doing this, earlier Mr. Ménard mentioned in French the fact that this was a great forum for people from different groups exchange ideas. So I'd be curious to find out how many people here today are from governments, whether in Canada or other countries. Can you raise your hand? Okay, from environmental organizations? Okay. From academia? It's pretty balanced. And then from business? Good. I was hoping that business would be the largest group. All right, so the next speaker is David Stuerman, who was very instrumental, along with Reg, for organizing this great conference. David is a consultant with the Business and Biodiversity Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. David joined the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity in early 2011 to help with the program of engagement with the business community. Prior to joining, David worked for the Canadian Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade in a variety of positions, including disarmament and non-proliferation, climate change, and as Deputy Director of the Canada-US Commercial Relations. David also served overseas as Trade Commissioner in Tokyo. He has a BSc in Biology and an MA in Political Science. David?
Thank you, Luke, and good morning to everybody. I'd like to extend my appreciation for everyone making the journey, some of them very, very long journeys, to come to Montreal. And you picked a very good week. We're very lucky with the weather. It's actually not snowing, so we're quite fortunate. What I've been asked to do very briefly in this is to really give a quick update about where we are as Secretariat in terms of biodiversity, and a quick sort of snapshot, trimmer, just to get everyone on the same page about what we're talking about with business and biodiversity, the challenge of the ecosystems, and really where we are. I think everyone is very familiar with it, but I just want to make sure that you're going to hear these terms throughout the coming panel sessions. We just want to make sure that everyone is fully cognizant of exactly where we're coming from with this. So, the value of biodiversity, the definitions are quite well known. They're embedded in the convention. We have the idea of ecosystem services, the idea that the biodiversity that underpins creates services that are of use, of value to human civilization. Of course, the problem we run into is that as we exploit biodiversity, as we exploit those services and overexploit those services, we find that we're digging into our capital. We're actually taking more than the earth can produce. And as you know, if you live off the interest of a bank account, you can live off that to perpetuity. If you begin to dig into the capital, eventually you run out. And we only have one planet, so we really don't have a chance to. This is an experiment we really can't do for very long. As Secretary Bradley Diaz mentioned, there is the study of the economics of ecosystems biodiversity, the TEEB study, which has attempted to value this. And the values we find are, the numbers are staggering. And the loss of biodiversity, as he mentioned, is staggering. It is equivalent to almost to the GDP of China. And again, as he mentioned, letting that type of value slip through our fingers, even though we take it for granted, is foolhardy on our part. So in terms of the value of biodiversity, some of you who have seen this presentation will know I go through an ecosystem, an explanation of ecosystems and how it relates to supply chains. But just to condense that into one slide, I think we can sum it up that if you have healthy ecosystems that have a lot of redundancy, a lot of connections, they generally lead to ecosystem services that can be used by supply chains in a variety of fashions. However, as we put pressure on the ecosystems and damage them, those ecosystems become less redundant. And we can actually find that the ecosystem is badly damaged and very severely compromised. That's bad in itself, but of course it then compromises supply chains, and the companies and the corporations and the economy that depends on those supply chains have to find new business models, often much more expensive, or the models actually become no longer applicable. Now, in terms of the business case, obviously people are familiar with this, I will go over this quickly, but it really can be looked at as a series of risks, risk management, and opportunities. And to my belief, the two are often one and the same. The risks and the opportunities are often flip sides. Okay, if you look at a risk, it depends on how you view it. It can also be seen as an opportunity. So the risks, obviously, are things like negative corporate images, consumer boycotts if the companies seem to be not green. There can be government legislation, reacting to government legislation, poor relations with stakeholders, and lack of social license to operate, extensive cleanup costs. We've seen a number of accidents, including recently in Quebec, the tragedy in Lake Mégantic with derailment, which cost a number of lives, but also has created a great deal of environmental damage. Insurance premiums and a scarcity of resources. If a company runs out of the resources they're using, well, they're in trouble. They have to find another business model. But the opportunities are, in a way, the flip side to this. If a company takes the market leadership, it can actually enhance its role. It actually will gain a consumer following because people will want to be buying green, especially if the price point is competitive. Good relations with governments, good relations with stakeholders means the easier social license to operate. The companies can actually get access to where they need to be. They have access to new funds, ethical funds, lower insurance premiums. Obviously, we don't have to worry about cleanup costs as much. Stability of supply. There are companies in business that have been in business for hundreds, in some cases even over 1,000 years, but they have to be conscious of their supply. Their supply has to be steady. The idea of bioprospecting. If we have healthy ecosystems and a vibrant biodiversity, many of the discoveries that are happening right now in terms of drugs and new technologies come from nature. But as Thomas Lovejoy has said, if we destroy nature, we're burning the library, we're burning the books before we've read them. We don't know what's in those, and that's lost forever. Supply management, supply chain management costs, again, show here. When you reduce the cost of resources, you often reduce the cost of supply chain, and this is good for companies, and it's also green. And then there's also the idea of change, and I think this is something where it was hinted at. Luke mentioned this about cell phones, new technologies. We can look at change as a risk or as an opportunity. Now, I think everyone here uses an iPad or a cell phone or something. Am I correct? Everyone would have one. When we consider this technology, okay, this is only about 20 or 30 years old, the technology that led to this. But this has been incredibly disruptive. It's cost our economies trillions of dollars to rewire for these. It's put millions of people out of work. It's done all sorts of disruptive things. But the benefits are obvious. We're all using them. And we're, in fact, we're lost without them. If these go out, everyone would look wandering around them or blind. We're very dependent on them, for good or for bad. But the thing is, it's an opportunity. It's something that required a social change over 30 years, which would have been unimaginable had we presented the end product to companies. But this is what we're asking again. It's not actually the change we're asking for, it's not as clear. To become sustainable, we need to rethink our way we're doing things. But we've done it already. We're doing it all the time. So it's really a question of, is this a risk? Is this a challenge, or is it an opportunity? So CBD itself, Secretariat, I'll just go briefly over what we're doing. As was mentioned in COP10, in the Conference of Parties in Nagoya in 2010, and COP11 in Hyderabad last year, we received a mandate to engage with the business community, and this was reinforced, and this is very encouraging. The parties recognize the importance of engaging with the business community. Right here I have the basic points of the two business decisions. I won't go into them in detail, but they do call for a dialogue, which we're embodying in the global partnership. The idea of compiling and disseminating case studies and tools and mechanisms so that business can understand. We're working with partners on that. And also to engage with businesses, to encourage businesses to share their best practices. Obviously, all of you coming to the meeting today, if you were just listening to myself saying, be green, it's great, and I'm from the UN and the government, you're not going to listen to me. But when other businesses say, we can actually do something, we can actually make a profit, this is actually viable, that gets people's attention, and that's very important. Our overall strategy in doing this, I think there are 4 elements in any component in terms of pulling this together. First of all, we have to create the enabling legislation. We have to create the enabling environment. Make sure that the legislation is friendly for companies to operate. This is something we do in the COP process, but governments are also responsible for creating this. We also have to create what I'm calling market pull. If you tell the companies to become green, but then no one buys the products, well, it's a good way to go out of business very quickly. You have to create the market for these products. This can come through government procurement. Governments represent a huge portion of the economy. If governments are buying green and sustainably, that will create a market, that will create a pull for companies. But also major corporations, the heads of supply chain. If they tell the supply chain, if you get companies like Walmart, like Nike, like any of the other big producers, saying, you need to become green, their supply chain will listen. And if they are committed to buying green, and then they can make sure that the consumers are buying those products, that will ensure that there is a market and that the rest of the supply chain will follow. That's very important. Then the information flow. We have to make sure we're getting the information to the companies. What we found is, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, it's often not that there's not enough information, there's too much. People are drowning it. They don't even know where to begin. And if you've got a small company with one CSR officer who's got to deal with all sorts of different environmental issues, biodiversity being one of them, and then you present them with tons of studies, they're not going to know. They're not going to know. We're going to give up in despair. So we have to be able to pre-digest this for them and help them to understand what they need to know and the first points they need to take. And then finally, we actually need to help companies take those first steps. The first steps are scary. As the old Chinese proverb goes, journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. That step is very hard to take. We help them with that first step, that second step. By the time we've done that, they'll realize the third and fourth step are not so bad, and then they'll be running before we know it. And that's very important, and that's, I think, where the partnership can come in. So our strategy has been to provide a global platform website where we're providing case studies and tools and mechanisms. We're reaching out to business, trying to engage them, trying to reach out to different fora. National workshops, very fortunate that I'm able to go to different places, different countries, and actually help people to build these national initiatives and bring them together. Green procurement, we're beginning to work with different governments and some partners to actually get biodiversity into the procurement issue. We also have a lot of analysis and dissemination of information. We're trying to work to analyze standards. Again, this is one of the problems with too much information. There's many, many green standards, but often the information they're talking about, they're not using exactly the same terminology. So we'll say protected area, which means one thing for one standard, might mean something slightly different for another standard, and might mean something totally different for another one. If it's confusing for the experts, and I'm certainly no expert on this, but if it is confusing for the experts, then for the average consumer, it's mind-boggling. And unless we get some consistency in this and some analysis, it's going to be very, very difficult to convince consumers to go for the right thing. Dissemination of tools and case studies as well. We have to get this out there. We have to get it out to the great number of companies who are just beginning to learn about this. And of course, we're not alone. There's many other organizations, but there's many, many partners. I've listed just a few on the bottom of the slide. Many of whom are here, many of whom are watching as well. And it's very important we work with them. As Mr. Diaz said, we cannot be a competitor, we have to be a partner to this. And that's how this has to work, it's essential. Finally, the global partnership itself. As you can see from the map, we are seeing movement in a number of different countries. This map is rapidly going blue. The blue represent countries that have active partnerships. We have them in a number of about a dozen or so countries. We have another couple dozen that are actually looking at actively forming partnerships. Again, many of them are here. Very grateful about that. And these have different advantages. It's basically tying together different initiatives. I'll explain that on the next slide. As has been mentioned, this is the third meeting of this partnership. The first meeting took place in Tokyo, the year after the decision in COP10, and the second meeting took place in conjunction with COP11 in Hyderabad. And this, so far, I think is at least the biggest turnout for the meeting, so I'm very pleased about that. The partnership itself, though, I just want to explain this in graphically if I can. I apologize to those of you who are having difficulty seeing the screen. So we have different countries, different regions. Within each country, within each region, there are businesses. There will be business associations. Obviously, there are governments. And there are also IGOs, NGOs, academia, all sorts of different people. They're all working at this. Many of them are working in competition with each other. Many are not even aware of who is doing what. The national initiatives are designed to bring these groups together, not to create, not to have one initiative riding over another, just to get them to talk to each other, just synergize a bit. To actually realize that if one group is doing something and another group is doing the same thing, maybe they should work together, combine their resources. That is what's most important. From there, the partnership will then bring together a network of these initiatives, as we're calling them, together. So this is a network of networks, and that's really what it is. It's not meant to be a guiding force, it's not meant to be the force, the be-all and end-all answer. It's simply a facilitation. All of the groups are doing all this good work, and there are many, many of them. We have to make sure that they are talking to each other and the information is available to as many people as we need it to be. So, as has been mentioned, for next steps, we're continuing our work on building a global partnership. We're continuing to amass best practices, case studies, new tools. We're working, as I said, with sustainable public procurement. We're trying to encourage SMEs to come in, and of course we've got a very extensive business program we're planning for Korea next year, as was mentioned by Mr. Park and Mr. Diaz. I want to leave you with a final thought. We're always saying we're going to discuss a number of different issues here, and these issues are very important in terms of bringing the next policy decisions to the COP. And we're saying that there's going to be a lot of good examples, and there are a lot of amazing examples. There are thousands of companies that are doing really amazing things. Unfortunately, there are tens of millions of companies out there. So thousands is only a small percentage. It's a little tip of the iceberg. We have to begin to get out of our own comfort zone and talking to people who understand this. We have to spread this to those companies who are not aware. This is the only way we're going to do it. We have to convince people this is the way. The smartphone is the way to go. The smart, sustainable revolution is the way to go, because basically, if you're not, we will go the way of the dinosaurs, both companies and ourselves. So we have made great progress, but I think we have a lot of work to do. I hope you enjoyed the meeting. I think we have a lot of good speakers, and I look forward to discussing, meeting all of you if I haven't met you before, and discussing with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, our last speaker before the break, and I would encourage you, since we have a lot of speakers and a lot of interesting information to share at this meeting, please come back early from the break so that we really can get into the meat of the conversation here. So we'll try to catch up on the time here, and please try to make each of the session on time. The next speaker is John K. Grant, who's the past chairman and CEO of the Quaker Oats Company of Canada, the chair of CCL Industries, chair of the Ontario Biodiversity Council, and trustee of the Simons Trust, and chair of the Bagnani Trust of Canada. John Grant is past chair of CCL Industry, chair of Ontario Biodiversity Council, a trustee of, well, I'll skip this because it repeats the same thing. He has chaired the boards of Atlas Cold Storage, Laurentian Bank of Canada, Scott Paper Company, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, the Canadian Canoe Museum, the Food and Consumer Products Association. He has been vice chair of Agricorp United and a board member of a number of companies such as Consumer Gas, AXA Insurance and Anglo Canada General Insurance Company, Home Oil, Genstar Capital, Lac Minerals, United Grain Growers Limited, and a B2B Trust. He is among the first Canadian business leaders to marry the concept of environmentally conscious decision-making with his commercial interests. A graduate from the Ivey School of Business at the University of Western Ontario, he joined the Quaker Oats Company in 1974, eventually becoming president and CEO, a post he held for almost 20 years. Upon retirement, he was appointed chair of the Canada's Land Company and vice chair of the International Development Research Centre. Mr. Grant's extensive contribution in the field of higher education and environmental protection is evident from his involvement as chair of Trent's University Board of Governors and chair of the Ontario Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy. As a member of the Canadian Polar Commission, he ensured that the interests of Aboriginal people remain at the forefront in efforts to protect the Arctic ecosystem. Mr. Grant has received many awards during his career, including the Knight of the Golden Pencil Award, the food industry's highest award, an honorary doctorate from Trent University for his part in encouraging the Canadian industry to adopt environmental code of ethics, the U.S. Sustainable Development Award for Business Leadership, and the Outstanding Achievement Award from the Ontario Forestry Association. In 2002, Mr. Grant was appointed an officer of the Order of Canada. He lives in Peterborough with his longtime partner, I don't know how to pronounce it, Sheila Grant, an Arctic historian and author of the award-winning Polar Imperative. I hope I pronounced this right.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous. I am standing between you and your break, so I will try to be as concise as I can and try and get through a few ideas and thoughts of where we can go in the future. I think this convention is likely one of the most important things that the UN can be doing this time. place. And I hope this morning I can give you some reasons why, but also implications, some solutions, and perhaps a way forward. Let me sort of begin by a picture of what the world may look like in a couple of years from now. Because in many ways, I think it's going to be a bit of a surprise. I'm talking about the limits of economic growth. Frankly, as long as the price of oil stays above $100 US a barrel, economic growth is going to be constrained around the world for a whole bunch of reasons, whether it's transportation, whether it's energy, electricity, all the things that make up who we are as an economy are going to be constrained. On top of that, if you look back now, not too many years, the population of the world was about 2 billion. Today it's over 7 billion. A frightening prospect for many of us as we look forward. And yet The Economist recently has said that basically our population is declining. It wasn't many years ago that the population across the world was over 2.5 children per family unit. It's now at the most 1.7 in the developing world and 1.4 in the developed world. That is, we're not replacing ourselves. So in many ways, we're likely facing, I think, a time when no growth becomes the order of the day. And in fact, in a recent speech by Jeff Rubin in Calgary, he's retired chief economist of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, he said, "We may turn green as a world, whether we like it or not." With fewer people and less need of resources, a more green world may be in our future. Often, we say that, of course, nature will not be destroyed. It's our human population that will. Nature will survive, maybe perhaps in a different way, but it will continue on. This world has a long history, and there's a long history going forward, a long future going forward, so that what we're doing today is merely a little blip. But that blip is very important because it's essentially the kind of things we're talking about today is a tipping point. To live in a no-growth world is a chance to change the dial that recognizes that economy and ecology are not exclusive. Look at the Latin determination of these words. Economy really means home. And ecology means all those things that are around our house. Both play a terribly important part in what we're trying to do. 3 elements that really sustain us: air, water, and our food. Water drops from the sky into a natural environment, trees, forests, land, seeps down through rivers and becomes the water of our sustenance. The air is refreshed through the forests, and the food that we consume is food that comes from that kind of environment. Whether you're rich or you're poor, you still obtain those sustenance from the same environment. It doesn't make any difference. It's important to all people. Often, there's a traditional argument that if we spend too much time talking about the environment and encouraging business to become much more environmentally conscious, it will have an effect on the market. The market does nothing. The market is not a physical human being. It's not a physical being. The market is merely a conjecture of words and phrases and adding up numbers. It really doesn't mean a thing. Markets can change. Markets can adapt to a society that becomes more conscious of the environment and more conscious of the biodiversity that surrounds us. The market can change. The market can put more emphasis on those things than in something that you add up in terms of numbers. Let me take a few minutes to talk a little bit about where we are on biodiversity. Over 7 years ago, in Ontario, Canada's largest province, the Ontario Biodiversity Council was established as a group of people separate from the political process, made up of people from all walks of life: environmentalists, farmers, industrialists, Aboriginal group leaders, property owners, conservation leaders, anglers and hunters, foresters, miners, power companies, and universities. We believed at that time, and we believe now, that Ontario should have an integrated biodiversity strategy that is central for all decision making and is made up of all ministries of government. What we accomplished last year, I think, was nothing short than incredible. We asked each of the Ontario ministries, from finance to health to transportation, right across the whole gambit, if they would put as a central core of their strategies to be part of our biodiversity strategy of the Ontario Roundtable. Every one of them signed on. Now, mind you, there was one interesting example, I must tell you. The last person who was dragged kicking and screaming to the table was the Minister of Health. You would think that when we talk about clean air, clean water, and good food, that we're dealing with the health, the quality of life of individuals. I kept saying, well, it's not the Ministry of Health, it's the Ministry of Sickness. They came, they sat, and they got the word, but it was fascinating for me to find that this industry was not at all interested in helping people to become healthier. Our biodiversity strategy was seen, and I'm not just saying this off the top, but was seen as being a leader. Obviously, Ontario is being a leader across with provinces across the country in Canada. And we're also being seen as a leader in the world. A number of companies are calling me and calling other people and talking about, what are you people doing? We've got our programs of various points that we want to accomplish over the years. We've got lots of support. The Aboriginal group has been tremendous for us. Young Aboriginal leaders, well-educated, are part of our Biodiversity Council and offering up some of their solutions on how we can make this really happen. What is important is that in order to encourage growth in our economic base and attract new businesses, the biodiverse story must be told. Why is it important for business to be attracted to jurisdictions that are concerned about biodiversity? Why, for example, is the Royal Bank of Canada one of Canada's leading banks, have as one of their key priorities biodiversity as a corporate strategy? What is our mining industry and our agriculture sectors, as Luke well knows, that you'll hear in many of the debates, now signing off and doing marvelous things with their own environments, and proud to show them off to people in the public and others. I want to tell a little story, and that was when I was president of Quaker Oats. This goes back a number of years, in the late 80s and early 90s. We began in our company a kind of a pioneer program in terms of being conscious of the environment. It starts with simple things like recycling, for instance, but it became even more, and became more conscious of those things that were around us. In fact, we had a river that ran through our properties, and we spent huge amounts of time to bring that back to its original state. There were a lot of things that happened. As we became more interested, the press picked up some of the stories that we were talking about and obviously covered what Quaker was doing. We had companies that were calling me and saying, by the way, John, we hear about all the things you're doing in the paper. Let me tell you, we're doing things that are even better than you're doing. That's when you got what I call healthy competition. Business thrives on healthy competition. If you're doing something good, we can do it better. That's what we wanted to encourage, and that's what we wanted to talk about. So CEOs came and said, I think we're ahead of it. The results of this whole thing were quite amazing and happened in a kind of an almost tumbling way in my life. Employee morale, people wanted to work for our organization. They were proud in the community to talk to their neighbors about what Quaker was doing. They became motivated employees, not in terms of the actual work they were doing, but the fact they were part of a movement to improve our environment and to improve the biodiversity around us. Customers came to us and said, by the way, we'd like to carry more of your products because we know you're doing great things and it helps us too. We had some suppliers who said, can we offer you a special price? Because this way we can have you on our account list. The market approved what we're doing. Our directors were proud. It showed in the bottom line because what we were essentially trying to accomplish was to be more efficient in our operation, more efficient in use of our ingredients and products and packaging and all those things. So everybody had this idea to be more efficient. What happens? Sales went up, the bottom line improved. Now, it's not just all this, but the fact is it's possible to take that kind of leadership and make it happen as a team. In many cases, when I talk to other organizations like associations, executive directors can't help us very much because they have to deal with all the companies in their association and the lowest common denominator. What we tried to pick up as we moved to the round table of the environment and economy is leading companies in various industries. Whether it was in the oil business at that time, it was Shell, who came on board with a lot of very innovative programs. But because they were a leading company in the oil business at that time, they were able to influence other companies to sort of join along with their activities. So what I'm talking about here is, I think, a healthy, biodiverse environment creates a very positive human experience and a contribution to society, health benefits, and motivated and productive workforce. Now, companies want to locate in regions that are stable, productive, and healthy. Let me emphasize the word healthy, as I mentioned earlier. The obvious health benefits with a biodiverse environment is so evident that it could go a long way to reduce the world's health costs. The environment is critical to our livelihoods. We know in our hearts. We also should put it in our heads, because accommodating biodiversity into our business model isn't a trend, it's a new reality. And I believe companies and jurisdictions just don't embrace it. If they don't embrace it, they'll be left behind. Let me quote Ontario's biodiversity strategy is, and I quote, is protecting the biodiversity of life on Earth is a challenge not for some of us, but for all of us. And the decisions that we make now will affect our communities, our country, and our world for generations to come. It's a big responsibility, but it's a huge opportunity for business. If we assume, and going back to my earlier premise, that the world of the future is going to be slow growth or no growth, the companies that succeed are going to be well managed, environmentally concerned, and produce good quality products in an efficient and resource reduction manner. This improves our business and also appeals, obviously, to our shareholders. So building an environmental diversity into our business plan is not only smart business, but it's the right thing to do. And just to finish, really, this is why I think the United Nations and the United Nations work on biodiversity in business. The timing is perfect. Build upon it. Make it happen. Put more resources against it. Get more key people from business speaking out around the world in conferences such as this. That's the engine. That's the engine that would make people are employed in the private sector. Yes, sure, they're employed in government, but governments don't lead to something else. They help and they make things happen, and they can support all the things we're doing. But let's get on with the job. So thank you very much. I'm sorry, I think that likely you're dying to do one thing or another, but take a break. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, John. Before I give the instructions on what's going to happen after the break, which I'm sure you're dying to go to, I'm asking you to please give a hand to all the speakers. They did a great job. I hope